Just at the start, I would like to acknowledge the contribution of the late Professor Dennis Panton to this very forum. Much of this COTE thinking and planning really started with Professor Panton, and I must confess, each year I do this. At first I was never in support of some of the ideas that he had with regards to COTE, and through the years I have learned to trust people with experience. He used to say, trust this experience, this is necessary. He used to say, you need to stop only writing papers, you need to go and speak in public, and I would say, I am not going to speak in public. And he would say, no, it is necessary. He is an informed public servant, and I know the spirits that we would take the message back to him, but in many regards, a lot of the things he said, with looking back now, were correct. And certainly, the department was blessed in many regards to have had someone like Dennis Panton with us for the period of time that he was there, and we hope that this session add some credibility to what he left behind. Certainly I will try to present in a manner and form that reflects. I was not told by Professor Panton, but I did work collaboratively with him. And some of the things I am about to say here, I hope will reflect some of his specific views as concerns the rentier economy. See a lot of familiar faces here, so I have spent some time changing up the presentation from some of the post-budget comments, which in a review of the local economy so close together, inevitably will have some similarities, but I have tried to change it up moving forward. Focus today on some of these things here. Interesting. Dylan Allen's presentation, although we didn't see each other for quite a few months, certainly set the type of background against which my presentation will be built. I usually like to represent the status of Caribbean economies by starting off with factor endowment bundle. And usually I focus on cricket. I want to aspire to play for West Indies cricket. Yes. So look at the cricket I'm using gold in the World 2009 Championship, 9.5V. So we certainly know that this young man has factor endowment capabilities and talent that could produce high levels of output. And yet in 2014, Gold's best time was 9.98. Certainly I could have done the same with Messi, who in the recently completed World Cup had a really good chance to help Argentina win the World Cup. The ball was on his right foot. I mean, that's what saying difference. He missed all the same. But with the type of factor endowment they have, one would expect a certain level of delivery and a certain level of performance. And 9.98, I mean, most people probably wouldn't even remember that there was an indoor race and where it was in particular. 9.98 just don't cut the bill when you're on 9.5. Against that backdrop, we look at the performance of the local economy. See that growth has returned. You hear a lot of trumpeting about the return to growth. Total reserves and months of import cover, that is, if all exports were to fall to zero, this economy will still be able to bring in about 12.7 months of imports. Gross official reserves at about 10.4 billion US dollars. The current account balance fairly strong. The inflation rate mostly under control. And the unemployment rate, if one were to look at the unemployment rate, certainly after 2003, you would say that this economy is really outstandingly managed. Really sound, grandiose macroeconomic management to instigate that type of trend and that type of persistence in low unemployment rates. And we'll talk about that some more as we go along. Again, Dylan mentioned factor endowment bundles, and here we tend to look at factor endowment bundles not from a static perspective, but also from a dynamic perspective, how it changes, therefore, with return influence the basket of goods you can produce, following something called dynamic extravagant theory. And here we see that one great credit to the current Minister of Energy is that although you see US foreign direct investment there, that could really probably be, or is very close to being US foreign direct investment into the petroleum sector. And certainly after 2010, you see strong numbers because of modification to the fiscal regime, the labor force. You see the labor force has basically become fully employed, the labor force fairly static. And crude oil, this economy is now a natural gas economy of crude oil production down to 29.2 million. The last time we had no crude oil production at that level was in 1958. Natural gas production is really the type of economy we are into now. One of the concerns with the labor force, so I looked at the growth rate of GDP in the last few years and I normalized using convert 2013 to a base year. Grew the economy at 2.5% for 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2017, at 3% for 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and at 3% thereafter. So I use very moderate growth assumptions. The number of people actual and supplied by natural labor force increased, so I used the labor force growth in the last 10 years, and I grew the labor force from 624.5 down to 2025 to get 756,200 people. And then I used the output per labor ratio in the economy for the last 5 years and looked at the amount of people we would require by 2025. And after including changes in the birth rate, changes in the death rate, changes in net migration, we have a deficit of 174,500 people moving into the future. So that factor endowment, that particular factor endowment will act as a world cost constraint. It will act as some kind of constraint moving forward to the growth of this economy, and it's something we need to look at closely, whether we want to go the CSME route or whether we want to sell Trinidad and Tobago visas for US 1 million, similar to what they do in the USA for entry, so that financial capital comes alongside people to work, is something we will definitely need to consider moving forward. I did a dynamic shift share analysis, and one of the things we found is that whilst real value added in the women tradable sector or the petroleum sector fairly constant, in the non-women tradable or manufacturing sector it has been improving, whilst in the non-tradable or services sector, some aspects anyway, it has been falling. And what we have found happening is that labor have been moving more into the services sector, and output per worker there has been declining. That is something that we need to be careful about. It's a classic Dutch disease type problem in which the services sector or the non-tradable sector grows at the expense of the non-women tradable sector. And we are seeing all the symptoms of that in many different ways in the Trinidad and Tobago economy. The US has started to engage hydraulic fracturing to lift significant amount of shale gas in that economy, and what has happened as a consequence is that Trinidad and Tobago has lost the US market, the US LNG market. Now it turns out that this loss worked in the favor of the Trinidad and Tobago economy because we shifted a lot of our LNG export cargoes towards South America, where prices reflect those in Chile, Argentina, and Brazil, where prices reflect those in Asia. But going forward, we need to be careful about this because the US has $120 billion planned investments in the shale gas downstream sector, and so we will always be now looking for markets, and we need to be careful going forward as to where and the type of long-term contract we have for our LNG, because other economies now enter into this dynamic ways for certain export markets. Another concern is the lack of diversification of the economy. So if we were to divide the comparative advantage of the economy into 4 states, A, B, C, D, A being a state of comparative disadvantage, B being a state of weak comparative advantage, C being a state of medium comparative advantage, and D being a state of strong comparative advantage, all the elements along the leading diagonal show some degree of persistence. You want the values above the leading diagonal to be large, and we have very small values, which means in large measure that we're not diversifying this economy as we should. We're not getting weak comparative disadvantage to be moving to strong or medium comparative advantage. We're not getting that type of movement, and that is a problem. So, for example, if one was to look at A to E, the probability of starting off in a state of probability of starting off in a state of comparative disadvantage, you have a 91% chance of remaining in that state of comparative disadvantage between 1999 and 2012, which is the type of numbers we really don't want to be seeing. If you started off in a state of comparative disadvantage A, the probability of moving to even weak comparative advantage B is too small. So the policy matrix we are using to diversify the economy isn't really giving us the type of results we want. We have heard a lot of concerns and other cries from the public regarding the foreign exchange problem. There's another looming problem in this economy that generally goes unnoticed in the presence of a lot of returns in the energy sector. That is the real effective exchange rate. Our real effective exchange rate has crept upwards significantly, and between 1997 to 2013, it has improved more than 50%. And as the real effective exchange rate increases, the external competitiveness of the non-booming tradable sector falls, and this is manifested in, if you look carefully, you'll see the number of sectors which are revealed comparative advantage more than one declining, which is not surprising. That is what you would expect. And this is something we need to pay some more attention to, that real effective exchange rate in particular. We have heard a lot of complaints about economic surveillance, or the capacity to make do economic surveillance on account of a slow return on data from the Central Statistical Office. And some concerns, certainly to me, seems to be we need to pay closer attention to the powers that be to the real effective exchange rate. Another problem I have with both is the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So you have this 9.58 talent, and yet still we manage a Heritage and Stabilization Fund which focus mainly on oil, but this is a gas-based economy. 90% of the production of barrels of oil equivalent comes from gas. So we need to work on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and also the speed at which I deliver. The CPEP, that would take about 50 minutes, not 5, but if you look at unemployment rate in Trinidad and Tobago, it fell from 10.4% to 3.6% in 2013. If you look at the CPEP fiscal budgetary allocation, it increased from 75 billion to 468 billion. Employment in community, social and personal services, where CPEP and URP is lodged, increased by about 50,000. In the same space, employment in agriculture fell from 36,000 to 19,000, and in manufacturing fell from 56,000 to 48,000, and the food import bill exploded from 2 billion to 6 billion. That is not good economics. Both need to run closer to 9.58, 9.98 wouldn't cut it. And in the CSP, or the Community and Social and Personal Services area, where we employ the CPEP and URP workers, you have a great degree of underemployment, 13% as compared to 3.96% in manufacturing. That is not logical. You can't applaud both for 9.98. Capacity utilization in manufacturing, not surprisingly, is therefore very down and is in support of the trend in the unemployment, in the employment level. In terms of gate funding, I'll skip this slide. Look at these numbers here quite quickly. The distribution of household income. So in less than $1,002 per month, 2%, then 1,000 to 2,999, 10.4, and so on. You would see that, and if you look at the third column, you would see that richer people access gate in a much more pronounced way than poorer people. We have said this over and over again at this forum. We will continue to say GATE needs to be modified, probably back to a dollar for dollar plus a means testing approach. Although I certainly think the whole funding mechanism itself needs to go towards income contingent loan or graduate tax, but we will debate that elsewhere. Fuel subsidy. Subsidy claims there, and what has happened with the subsidy claims, a lot of people have used low interest rates in the bank and have started to put significantly more cars on the road, so the outcome of the fuel subsidy in part was not traded off in an improvement in the global competitiveness index. In fact, it seemed to lead to a rise in traffic jam and pollution more than anything else. And again, the fuel subsidy is something we need to look at. I have preliminarily looked at one fleet owner from the Marabella area where I am from, and they receive about $57 million a year in subsidy. I have a real problem with that. I think I should take that $57 million and give to students. Certainly, I have no problem buying a Charles coffee for you, but I don't want to be subsidizing a large fleet owner $57 million per month. Certainly. Second to last slide. Economic surveillance at CSO. So I've been looking closely at this. If you look at the review of the economy 2010, Professor Watson, I'm going to appeal to you here, you would see the 2010 review of the economy quoted the GDP at 90 billion. The 2011 review of the economy quoted it at 89 billion. It remained the same for 2012. And 13, and then it fell again. From 2010, it went down, constant. Sorry, went down, constant, went down. This is part of the problem with the economy. We need to put more effort rather than CPEP and make-work program and these glamorous things into these type of institutions that, whilst I believe CSO is credible, and I believe these numbers not interfered with, the efficiency and the pace at which we get correct starting to become a problem. So we keep modifying 5 years after the GDP downward. So if you take 2014 GDP minus 2010 GDP as forecasted in 2010, you'll get 2.5. But when you use the number that was corrected 4 times, by 2014 you get a growth rate of 5% between those time periods. That could be interpreted very worryingly in different places. So, last slide. Evidence of the resource scarcity in the economy remains no real outcome from, to me, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting and the 5th Summit of the Americas region just wasted $1.4 billion in this country. Evidence of the Dutch disease by appreciating really effective exchange rate. Lack of diversification in the economy as indicated by the revealed comparative advantage indices. Evidence of abnormal cost disease problem as indicated by the dynamic shift share shift analysis. Extent of underemployment in the economy, the public debt is rising. We put in money in the heritage and stabilization fund in years when we run in fiscal deficit. We have a stagnation of the energy sector, and we need to be careful about the shale gas threat from the USA. We have a stagnating agricultural sector and manufacturing sector, while we have a booming railroad sector. And the extent of the transfers and subsidies just need to be modified. Both could win a race at 9.98, and that is fine. But we have seen this young man do 9.58 with the existing fact endowment capability he has. And certainly each time he comes out, we would expect that the right type of management and coaching and efficiency and practices would help him go closer to 9.58 than 9.98. Thank you.
See the issues. Why you didn't speak about it in the way I am talking about it? It refers to social and economic political institutions and the things surrounding them. And I'm wondering to what extent the weaknesses in our economic and political institutions, how they transfer into some of the problems that you see in the economy. So I guess anybody could answer that.
Good morning, everyone. So my question is really directed to Dr. Hussein, and it really concerns the recent announcement of the increased minimum wage. And I would just like you to share a few of your thoughts on that for a minute and what the likely effects would be.
Okay. And I give you an example to explain the problem. We have this fiscal deficit and huge debt in a number of countries. In some cases, it rose as high as 150% of GDP. And you know, the international institutions, in the case of Jamaica, everybody is in town, the IMF, the World Bank, the IDB, and so on. And we also getting into the act. Trying to solve the problem in the Ministry of Finance. But it's not a Ministry of Finance problem alone. It's a problem of how the budget is composed and planned and prioritized as a community. So that what happens is that you don't have the key interest groups in the society being involved in that process. And so do you have this junction. And so you have this situation with the budget where, I understand in Trinidad when the budget is to be read, people park up, people start trying to get fuel. Because they don't know what is going to happen. But that's the problem. The process should be one in which there's continuous discussion so that there are no surprises, so that you allow people to plan. So I agree with you. So that ECLAC is beginning to develop a program in 6 Caribbean countries designed to do 2 things. One is to find out what is the impact of the budget. In other words, you say that you want to spend so much in agriculture. Are you getting value for money? And how do you know this? That's the first thing. And secondly, what is the institutional framework that will allow you to monitor so that a lot of the discussion now on public finance is about public expenditure tracking mechanism so that you ask the community, are you benefiting and how, and so on. So I agree with you that the institutions matter. And it comes back also to the issue I raised earlier about the business environment, where there isn't enough collaboration between the public and the private sector on priorities. And I mean the private sector in its broadest sense, not just the traditional private sector. So I think it's a very important question. Institutions matter.
In relation to the question on the minimum wage, only about 3.4% of the Trinidad and Tobago population would be affected by the minimum wage. Most people work for more money than that anyway. And whilst the minimum wage was a nice announcement effect at the right point in time, it sounded sexy and therefore would attract attention as a move to help improve the welfare of that affected category of people. The minimum wage is only applicable to about 3.4% of the population. But even at $15, if $7, which was the minimum wage at around 1998, if we were in 2014 to try to re-establish the purchasing power of the affected group, we would have to raise the minimum wage to $19.50. So simply the increase to $15 still doesn't put the bill. We have much more fundamental problems than that. We have an economy in which the unemployment rate is predetermined and in many regards now by state involvement. The private sector no longer conditions the unemployment rate in this economy. I have said time and time again that, well, next year is an election year, but if next year was not an election year, we could probably sit here and say that the unemployment rate in September 2015 going to be 3.72% because the private sector intervenes, employs and absorbs a certain amount of people, and then the state intervenes, in my opinion, in my personal opinion. I think that there is not necessarily the Bureau of the Department of Economy, is my personal view. And conditions the unemployment rate so it could look lookable, it would look sexy. So back to the specific question of the minimum wage, so I don't see that really having an effect. I don't think it will lead to a wage price spiral or anything as some people are concerned about because it's mostly ineffective.
Okay. Ambassador, you want to respond to
Well, perhaps just to reaffirm something that Dr. Lane said. The Chilean experience is definitely what she has affirmed. Stability, rule of law are elements, fundamental elements of the economy, not just for attracting foreign capital, but also for projecting investments, local investments in the medium and long-term scope. Another comment that I do have, which is very interesting, is what Dr. Jose said about LNG. We are the second largest LNG importers of Trinidad and Tobago. But the presence of the shale gas industry in the United States definitely is making things, or this trend, change. It is highly possible that we should, or we can, at the same time, importing more gas coming from the US in the medium term, as soon as the terminal in Louisiana is finished. Then, the question is, given the impact in trade between Chile and Trinidad and Tobago, which is mostly concentrated in LNG, what would we do for making Trinidad and Tobago's LNG more competitive in the world market? I do have an answer. An answer is that we should study as soon as possible a partial scope agreement between us. US gas comes to Chile with zero tariff. Zero tariff because we do have already a free trade agreement with the US. But we don't have a free trade agreement with Trinidad and Tobago. And a partial scope agreement is certainly something that we have to study. And also, something which is very important for us is to benefit the consumers of Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of Chilean products are coming here, but are coming through the United States. That means that are coming with a 20% higher cost. About 15 to 20%, depending on the product. 20% higher cost. Because these Chilean products are coming to Trinidad as American products. Why make this way through the United States and this making the products less accessible to the consumer? I believe the answer remains is the same. It's a partial scope agreement.
Thank you very much. I think I would support any initiative to make Chilean wine cheaper. So I think there's one speaker, while he's asking, is there a second one? One of the youngsters? Come on. Yes, the young lady, second, then you're with.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, for Dr. Hossain, when it comes to the wastage, economic wastage, right? There's a gap between economic solution and political solutions, okay? In Indonesia, they try to stop the fuel subsidy over there. And then because political backlash, they reinstate it. And then what is your solution, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, to reduce the fuel subsidy bill without causing any big, people like Sweden say. So, what is your solution? Because these are always find problems, but the political solution is the real issue behind it, in my view.
Okay. Statistical research shows that it's mostly accessed by people of high income levels rather than those of low income levels. And therefore, the requirements of its accessibility should lean towards a more income modification approach, right? But shouldn't the reason why these people of lower income levels don't access it be investigated rather than who accesses it?
Good question. Dustin?
Dr. Hussain, on your last slide, you had a point there which said that perhaps Trinidad and Tobago should not be contributing to the HSF, while at the same time running a deficit. Is that correct?
In some years, we put money in the HSF while we run a deficit.
Yeah. What I'd like to say is that the contributions to the HSF should really have no bearing, as it were, with respect to the deficit. The real reason for saving in that, which really is a heritage fund, is to actually accommodate or to account for the depletion in the natural resource. What I would argue for is that perhaps the mechanism by which we save into the HSF is currently incorrect. We're not saving sufficiently enough. The real problem with this economy, I would suggest, is that why are we even running high deficits? That's where the real problem is. I remember back in, and of course you know why there's a reason for that with the high marginal propensity to import, for example. You're not going to get the stimulus that you so desire. But I remember in 2008 when the world was just about engulfed in the global financial crisis, and I called and spoke to Dennis Panton. We were speaking about how should Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean respond to this. And his immediate response to me was, cut and devalue. Not to stimulate. He understood quite precisely why stimulus wouldn't work in this type of an economy. But he also understood as well why we needed to also now export further, and why we needed to improve our competitiveness. And it was very interesting to see your slide on what was happening to the real effective exchange rate. It has been appreciating since 1997. And so there's a real need to manage that balance as it were. Thank you.
Okay, we have just enough time to answer. I was going to ask Roger since you are the prime target.
Really need an announcement. You need to have an announcement effect, so just as we did with premium, you need to announce even if it's a 5% cut in the diesel subsidy, so that you start to send, a lot of it appears as stock right now, you start to send the right type of signal to the consumers, and we need to move quickly towards the rapid rail or like type of transportation mechanism that will provide a mass transit opportunity, so we can move people at a low cost. So we cut the subsidy on one hand and we provide this change in the transportation network on the other. We have been moving too slow with these things. And so, a lot of the problems with oil-based economies really linked to the fact that men of a fat and fertile soil become comfortable in the luxury of the economic rent generated by the petroleum sector. So that's my comment in relation to that. In relation to GATE, yes, very good question, why don't poor people access GATE? And there are a host of reasons in relation to that. Homework centers, a number of comments could be made in relation to how it is we could facilitate more poor people getting improved grades in the first hand that will help them access GATE or matriculation standards to reach university. The truth is, if you look at campus, a lot of the people that are on GATE funding are people who can afford to pay some amount of contribution towards the university education. So that a certain aspect of GATE represents wastage. We have on campus, and this is the examples I use when speaking to students, we have Mitchells, we have Mario's, we have Cold Stone, we have a ton of opportunities for students to use the surplus money that they receive for GATE education to now use for consumption. And the business community recognize that, and they quickly come here and they quickly mop up your surplus resources. The landlords around the campus as well also recognize that my Dublin rents quite quickly for you. They even put some of you all in containers now. And the last thing is the HSF. As long as actual energy revenue supersedes forecasted energy revenues by 10% or more, up to 60% of the surplus goes into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And a vast amount of comments, Justin, could be made in relation to that. I'll just point out that, one, you're certainly correct that it shouldn't be whether or not a fiscal surplus or a fiscal deficit is what that we put money into the HFS. It should be, in each year we should put some money towards that based upon a much more considered. We went at a price of oil of around $80 a barrel, and the lifting cost of oil is around 25 to 30 US dollars a barrel. So you have a huge margin between 80 and 25 to 30 dollars a barrel that gives the government a lot of flexibility. Of course, the higher the price of oil you pitch, is the lower the likelihood that you would need to go back and ask for more resources, because when pitching at a high price of oil, you immediately bring the resources into your domain as a government. It's an election year, so obviously, it's a literary population, obviously, clear to most people, the high pitch in terms of the price of oil. Whether or not we should devalue, though, I don't think I agree with Professor Banton and or your comment there. Yes, the really effective exchange rate about 60% overvalued. But there are a lot of other things we can do in terms of the global competitiveness index, for example, to bring it down, some of those pillars. That we should be looking, the devaluation should be the very large thing with $10.4 billion in official reserves to look at. So we need to look at things like improving port efficiency, reducing the amount of traffic jam, all these other things that can improve the competitiveness of the economy rather than looking at devaluation. That should be the last thing, because devaluation have all type of other economic consequences that will raise all type of issues.
Well, I think I agree with Roger on the issue of devaluation. We've gone through this in the 1980s and found that the big impact is that it increases the domestic prices and has serious problems with low-income owners and problems with trade unions and so on. I think that should be the last resort because of how the small economy works. But frankly, I would say that as the UN moves towards the Sustainable Development Goals in post-2015, that would require a tremendous investment in statistical and data gathering capacity. And unfortunately, what we see in the region from the ECLAP point of view is a declining capacity to monitor, to generate timely information and to monitor our economies carefully. So for example, and access, timeliness and access, so that many of the censuses have been done and some are being done, but the access of that information to researchers and so on isn't there. This is really a problem which has become even more magnified as we attempt to monitor other areas in the economy outside of strict economics.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Have the last word, barring me, of course.
Well, just one comment. Today, in Port of Spain, is a big gathering of economists and business people of all over the world about competitiveness. I have just competitiveness definitely, together with innovation, are elements for boosting our respective economies, let's say in the Caribbean or Latin America. And there is only one figure which is very provocative. R&D in Latin America and the Caribbean, R&D in Latin America and the Caribbean is equivalent, or investments in R&D are the equivalent to the investments in this subject of the Republic of South Korea. So all in our continent, we are not investing enough in innovation. I think this figure, which was released the other day at this university by the Secretary General of the OAS, illustrates very well, or clearly enough, one of the aspects that I have mentioned here. Another reflection. is that Latin American countries and the Caribbean countries have not done enough for knowing each other. It's just, for example, I take in the area of diversification of regional economies. One element is still tourism. Chilean tourists to the region, Chilean tourists come to the region. 200,000 Chileans vacation in the Caribbean, let's say in Cuba, in the Dominican Republic, in Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, or Mexico. 200,000 people are potential visitors to the Caribbean countries. But we still don't have enough air services agreements. We don't have the knowledge for attracting my connationals to these beautiful areas. And examples like this, there are many. The most formidable potential for the Caribbean region lies, as Dr. Alain said, in the south, in Latin America. Brazil enough. Brazil only is a country that has incorporated to the middle class about 40 million people in recent years. Brazil only is a country of 200 million people. And there is something to be done. One, in the area of innovation. Second, in the area of focusing or making some strategy focused to Latin America in general. I thank you once again, and I want to please for giving me to pass so many messages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And thank all the speakers in the meanwhile. We are bringing this session to a close, and I'm handing it back to Marlene, who is overall chair for this session. So let's get to the presenters.
Thank you very much, Professor Watson, for chairing that session. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a 15-minute break. And we return for our second session, which will start immediately after the break on the Trinidad and Tobago economy. You are invited to the Social Sciences Faculty Lounge for refreshments as part of the break. I ask that you do so fairly promptly so that we can be back here in time for the start of our session.
This brief is based on the writings of Professor Dennis Panton on the Trinidad and Tobago economy. It is entitled Missing Element for Economic Development and was published in the Trinidad and Tobago Express newspaper on 22nd of July 2014. Trinidad and Tobago is considered the most industrialized economy in the English-speaking Caribbean with its population of 1.3 million over approximately 5,128 square kilometers. During the 19th century, its economy was primarily based on sugar, but when oil came, it took over. Over the years, although oil and gas sector has been a significant form of revenue and booster for economic activity, fluctuating energy prices have had negative impacts on the economy. 1950 to 1973 was marked as a period of relatively high growth with stable international oil prices, while the periods from 1974 to 1982 showed high growth coupled with high oil prices. And in the decade between 1983 and 1999, there was negative per capita real growth. During the oil boom at the start of the 1980s, the public sector expanded rapidly, and this resulted in an increase in the government's recurrent expenditure. The increases in oil revenues will also encourage the increases in government capital expenditure programs. After the 1980s, the economy experienced declines in both oil prices and oil revenue. However, being unable to place constraints on their expenditure, both government and private expenditure continue to rise. During this period, unemployment level of 10% to 20%, real GDP declined 28%, and the economy was losing millions of dollars in foreign exchange reserves. Late Professor Panton compiled an extensive amount of work on the Trinidad and Tobago economy, in which he explored the dynamics of the Trinidad and Tobago as natural gas and energy exporting economy. Contributes a mere 5% to the economy's employment. According to Professor Panton, Trinidad and Tobago heavily dependence on this natural resource in the development of the national economy has often resulted in many macroeconomic problems, foreign exchange debt, poverty, and balance of payments deficits. In his analysis of the macroeconomic issues impacting the local economy, he also sought to include policy implications of these issues and ways in which these negative impacts can be mitigated. Included among the policy prescriptions he advanced with sustainable development practices and economic diversification. Specifically, he suggested the need to boost competitiveness in the non-energy sectors in efforts to achieve a more balanced economy. Ultimately, Panton saw civil society as having an important role to play in the management of energy resources in Trinidad and Tobago. To facilitate this role, he envisioned access to full information on the energy industries. This he considered a critical but still missing element for the sustainable development of Trinidad and Tobago's economy.